Hollywood studios, it has an incredible history, isn't it? Most industries actually start from disorganized scratches and then move to more consolidated, organized setups. Indian cinema is the exact opposite in the sense that it actually started with deeply well-integrated studios that had control over distribution, exhibition, and production. These were studios that had everyone from spot boy to the superstar of the times in their payroll. These were studios that made multiple films in a year. They had annual slates. And of course, I'm talking about the likes of Bombay Talkies, Imperial Studios,
40s, 50s.
Yeah, and then of course, there was a decline in the 40s, World War II onwards. What replaced it was a more freelancer system or the star system.
Mayank, can I just...
Yeah. Is it echoing?
I can't hear properly. There's a bit of an echo. What to do? These monitors are working. Maybe we should speak softly.
Can you hear me now?
Bouncing back. Yeah, just pull my slightly. Test 1, 2. I think so.
So what really replaced that studio system was a more freelancer system, a star system where producers could spend their life's earnings trying to make one film, right? And of course, a lot of that has changed over time as well. And with America, and I'm going to start this conversation with Roven. In America, it's still 5 or 6 top studios that control the production line. You've been a producer, one of America's greatest producers over the last 40 years, Chuck. How do you think the American studio system has changed in all these years that you've been a filmmaker?
Well, when I was fortunate enough to start making films, it was the early 80s. Well, I guess it was the early 80s when I actually got my first film made. I pretended to be a producer in the 70s. And back then, most of the studios were in a lot of trouble because they had been making movies with larger budgets. And many of them didn't work. Like the Cleopatra movie with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton was a huge bomb for 20th Century Fox. It almost went out of business. And Columbia Pictures also was having a lot of problems. And so they decided to make films with young filmmakers like, Bob Rafelson and Peter Fonda. They make movies like that, which would actually turn out to be big hits. So one of the great things about the content creation business is that you have to be able to change your course, right? And do things that when something's not working, you try something else. And the business itself, right, has gone through changes because when television came out, they talked about that was going to be the death of the theatrical experience. And then when DVDs came out, and before that, videotapes, that was going to be the death of the theatrical movie business. And of course, there are those who think that streaming is going to be the death of the theatrical movie business. But as these last few weeks have shown, movie business can be very healthy. If we make movies that people want to go see, right? As a group experience. Right. And I think what's really great as the world evolves with all kinds of creations, that we as filmmakers and producers and content creators have to also change with the times and do things that are going to enhance people's desire to not only stay at home and at the comfort of their own couch, but also realize that the group experience in a movie theater you can't duplicate.
Right. So, Chuck, one of the reasons why I asked this question also is very relevant to India and India's entertainment scene and the topic at hand is, when you look at your box office receipts over the years, it's probably about $10 billion, right? What percentage of that came from American viewers and what percentage came from outside America? And has that ratio, what's been the ratio like over the years where America became actually global cinema?
Well, there's no question that when I started making films, the international box office was much less than the domestic box office, and I'll call the domestic box office the U.S. and Canada, right? Because if you're releasing a movie in the U.S., you better be releasing it also in Canada.
Canada's still Canada. It's not the U.S. yet.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Canada is still not part of the U.S. And I doubt it ever will be, but it's nice to have another country next to your border, particularly if you're friendly with them. They speak the same language. That's good too. So I would say that it's really inverted. Back in the 80s, and I'm not saying this with any real knowledge, but the feeling was certainly over 50%, maybe even as high as 60% of the box office at that point in time was U.S. or U.S. and Canada. And I would say that's inverted now, right? But, there are movies that come out and, you find that 50% or more is still domestic. The first Wonder Woman, for example, even though it did over $800 million in worldwide box office, the box office is more 50-50 than 60 or 65-35.
Right.
But as a general rule, it's now somewhere between
It's an inverted situation. And one of the things that people always said why American cinema or Bollywood as it were manages those economies of scale is because they make movies for the world. Whereas Indian cinema, for however big it gets, it's still Indian audiences mostly and Indian diaspora across the world. Has that changed a little bit in terms of numbers? I'm coming to you, Dinesh, in the sense that when you look at numbers pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, I'll take your example of your own film, say Stree. Stree would do, and you would know the numbers best obviously, but it would be say about 180 to 200 crore. But when you make a Stree 2, it crosses 800 crore. It's the same film in a sense, the same franchise, but it's 4 times post-pandemic. Likewise with Chava, if I'm not mistaken, that is also hitting about 800 crore plus, something that we hadn't seen before, it wasn't common. Does that allow you as a producer an economy of scale where you can actually up your budget? Of course there's risk, but there's risk in everything.
So I think I'll divide your question into 2 parts. If you look at what Chuck was saying about American films, they have spent time and effort to build an international market. It requires focusing on it, I'm talking about beyond Indians, and it requires money. So we need to do that. We don't have that organized. Like everyone says content is king, but a very wise man told me distribution is God. So I don't think our films reach there, for which we have to work on it. Yeah. The second part is the content of films. I think we're in a very interesting space. I think any example that you take of content from a region breaking out in the world first explodes in that region. I think post-pandemic, we're finally getting our act together. We are understanding the stories need to be made for the common man. You take the example of Stree and Chava. I don't think cities come to the theatre on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm talking about main cities. I think they wait till, all of us here wait to know for sure it's good because it's expensive. It requires time and become later. So people in smaller towns are coming in and in the last 10 years, we are not aspirational to the West. We want stories about ourselves. And we are the only country that has such a rich culture. But we as filmmakers somewhere stopped looking. I think Stree and Chava are examples of stories in our own culture as local as it gets, and they've exploded. The second step, when films do that kind of business in your own market, is you have the capital to expand. So we are attempting to make, Mahavatar, which is probably the largest film we've ever made, and we want to make it, there is the technology available to make a world-class film. And because the films have worked, you are willing to take that risk. But then again, we'll have to work on the distance.
Absolutely.
I think another thing that can help us go international is collaboration. So just to throw it out there, if in the pre-climax of Stree, for 5 minutes you have Spider-Man, you're going to explode. But is that possible? But every big brand is collaborating. Everybody wants India. So if there is a swap like that, we can go international and they get our indigenous market. So I think it's right there. Hopefully the next 2 years, we're going to really push it to, change that ratio. Because our ratios, except a few examples, are 80-20. So to go there, we need to push quality and we need to make our content go global through distribution.
Right. Would the same thing apply, to technology? Because one of the things that people have always said over the years is that the American tentpole looks the way it does is because it has that kind of, global power to sort of power through that kind of investment in technology. Our VFX is not the same level as them because our number of audiences is not the same. Would it apply the same? I know you tried that with Brahmastra as well. You put in the best that you can in terms of the way it looked, VFX-wise. But is that something that would be easier to do when those numbers are much bigger, even if it's domestic market first?
The point of what we are all doing with leveraging tech is to make sure that we give when they come to the cinema, to experience a story, to experience something that is only beyond imagination. That's the power of being in the movie business.
Right.
And the more we leverage that, I think the more...
Right, because there was a point where our VFX looked so substandard, but even in the smallest towns, they're exposed to the best in the world in any case. They watch the same Hollywood movies that all of us do. But when you see a Bahubali, it looks world-class in its own way. Is that something that's possible? Because Bahubali can bring those numbers as well.
So yeah, I think it's not, to be honest, it's not because of visual effects that Bahubali does the numbers it does. I genuinely believe it's great storytelling. Because, when you go back and see Jurassic Park in 1993 or you see Bahubali now, it wasn't like they had the greatest budgets and application of visual effects because
it was still storytelling.
It was still storytelling.
Right.
That always transcends everything else.
Right.
But what we are saying is the promise to the consumer, the audience that's coming to the cinema, is they know that they will not get a second tier experience. You're coming for a premium experience, you're paying the money, you're giving your time. You want to make sure that you're going to get the absolute best that's possible.
Right.
So when we get, I'll give an example of a film like Interstellar that we, not just won an Oscar for doing the best visual effects, but when a director like Christopher Nolan imagines that I'm going to show you something that there is no visual reference of in the world, like what happens to light when it travels through a black hole or wormhole does not exist even in scientific journals. So that's when, as a company, as people who created the art form of that experience, we were actually able to show science how this can transcend, storytelling can actually help science in that sense. And that's where, you're sort of creating something that you've never seen before. And that to me is the power of what technology can do. Right. If you can dream it, you can make it. And if you go with that view, then the promise to the consumer is that come in and watch it on the biggest screen in the greatest way that we intend to show it. And then they're coming in hordes and coming back again for more. Because that's a part that I think we're losing in our industry, that we've not been servicing that part of the aspiration of why we go to the movies. And that sort of is where technology can, be really helpful in bringing those stories to life.
Not technology for technology's sake is what you're saying.
No, because ultimately nobody wants a tech demonstration.
Right.
Nobody's interested in coming to a 100-foot screen to see how cool tech is. Right. I don't think that's what consumers care about.
Right. We'll come back to the studios now.
Sorry, I just want to make one more point.
Please.
So while we talk about that, but there's also tech that's involved in, let's say now, bringing, digital actors to life. There's, being able to, AI is really leading the way in how you can bring, actors of yesteryears, people who've gone away, actors of today. Like we can today make Aamir be 25 forever.
Aamir is 25 forever.
I am 25 forever. What are you talking about?
I thought you just celebrated your birthday a few weeks ago. So, but the point being that, that sort of is, the opportunity that you now have, that, you can bring that's the fidelity of storytelling and technology that is available. And the same applies to how technology is used in distribution.
Tell them what you showed me in LA.
Yeah, so, so we did, a film called Here, which is Tom Hanks, who everybody knows is close to 70. And we brought him back to his screen age of 25 when he was a very young man. And I think if you see the visuals and the quality of what's been achieved is absolutely unprecedented. So the idea of now keeping someone like that, who's a great talent, in his form of what his fans would love to see and experience is a reality today. So you can use technologies like that to, I believe, do that for, the very vast and very rich, talent that we have in our country that have tremendous fan following.
I mean, of course, there was The Irishman where they used technology to make Al Pacino much younger in his younger years. They used the same thing with Robert De Niro, but which is very different.
That is much more, I would say that's not AI enabled. That's
no, not at
much.
all. Yes.
Now what we are saying is that the power of the technology is that what we create is AI is actually helping train what we call the models of on which you base your technology on by the actors themselves. So if you make a AI version of Tom Hanks, it's actually made of him. We're not doing an artistic representation of him.
Right.
So we're actually training the technology on what Tom Hanks was and is, and from his expressions to his features, everything is being built on his own data. And that is, to me, the real game changer in how AI can really help make it authentic for the future.
I mean, you also demonstrated how it happens real time.
Yeah.
So I can be made to look like somebody else live.
And that, so, I didn't want to take over this time in the tech conversation, but since Aamir saw that in detail, so we actually can have, and when I talk about actors that aren't alive anymore, as an example, you can actually have a stand-in actor and have, a digital version of them being put on while you're filming in real time and actually be able to film it like you would film a normal movie.
Right. I mean, just a few years back, making Irishman was so expensive that Scorsese had to go to Netflix, and Netflix decided to fund it because theatrical model would not allow it. And which brings me to the other conversation about studios. I mean, we talk about the traditional studios as we always have, but the fact is 2016 onwards, we've had new kind of studios that finance, distribute, exhibit, and of course produce films for their own platforms, and those are the OTT platforms in India since 2016. Lots of Indian content creators or producers, as you would call them, have really taken on well to Netflix's and the Amazon Prime Videos and the Jio Hotstars of the world. One of them is obviously sitting here, Dinesh Vijan. You completely changed the model in a certain sense where you took on, I think Inside Edge would have been the first web series, as it were, to come out of India for Amazon Prime Video. You did Mirzapur. You were a theatrical production company, and then you became, in a way, a producer for the Amazons and the Netflix of the world. Was that a game changer for you as a filmmaker, Ritesh?
Hi, good morning, everybody. I think, what it did is, it did not change our drive for making films for cinema. That is still there. And if you ask me even now, I would only want to make movies for a theatrical experience. But what it gave you an opportunity which the streaming platform gave you is to tell different kind of content, right? You had an audience there which was not watching broadcast TV, but was consuming content from around the world. So you go out there and you could tell stories. I mean, that gave a birth to a lot of new talent behind the cameras, right? Writers' rooms started being set up. You had an opportunity for technical crew to coming on board, which you would ideally not hire them for films, for any, there were various. So there's so much of opportunity created for it. But the main thing, which is whether you tell a story in a theater, the soul, which is the writing, the film, the story, right? I think that it gave you an opportunity of telling different kind of stories. You could have characters which didn't need to end in 90 minutes or 2 hours or 2.5 hours.
Right.
So the entire format is very different where series are concerned. Also, what I think is that there is some benefit. What they did is suddenly what Dinesh was talking earlier about distribution model. Now, today, people have discovered Indian content. Whether, like Aamir says, sometimes it's by accident or whatever, at least they're aware. So today, if an Indian film goes outside the diaspora, they're aware of it, The Western audience is aware because your content is available now in 200 countries.
Right. While they're flipping, they'll discover it. Right.
Yeah. So I'm saying they're at least aware of, okay, so even if you go out and try, I think today if you go and distribute a film which is for theatrical viewing and it's outside your diaspora, there is an opportunity for you.
Right. Right.
You know,
right.
so I
to
think
go global to go global on certain, I think RRR would be a great example of something that came on Netflix in the US. People saw it and then they wanted a theatrical release. And so then it went to theaters in the US. And then of course there was the Oscar story that happened.